Welcome to 45 Men's Sleep History, where history is not just about dates and events, but gentle stories that transport you to a peaceful world. Today, we will quietly step into a magnificent era of the Roman Empire. Imagine yourself as a keeper of the Roman Colosseum, where fierce battles between gladiators and wild animals unfold, and your job is to maintain order, ensure safety, and prepare for these intense events. Let your mind relax and join us as we explore a day in the life of a Roman Colosseum keeper, a job that never rests and is always full of challenges. In the heart of ancient Rome, where the sunlight cast its glow over the cobblestone streets and monumental structures, the Roman Colosseum stood as one of the greatest symbols of the empire, with a seating capacity of up to 50,000 spectators. This arena was not merely a site for gladiatorial combat, but also a center for grand spectacles, such as wild animal shows, naval battles, and public executions. Behind the roaring crowds and the intense battles, there was one figure working quietly behind the scenes, the keeper of the Colosseum. On a hot June morning in 80 AD, Marcus Valerius, a man known as a vigilator, or the keeper of the arena, began his workday at the Colosseum. Marcus's responsibilities were far more than just overseeing the combat. They included managing all the logistics, ensuring the safety of the spectators and fighters, and maintaining order throughout the event. As a vigilator, Marcus had one of the most important roles in ensuring that everything ran smoothly within the arena. From preparing for the battles to managing security and overseeing the gladiators and animals, Marcus was a man in his mid-40s, someone who had once served in the Roman army and had seen his fair share of battles. His military background had shaped him into a disciplined, focused individual, but this job required more than just toughness. It required a unique patience, as each day at the Colosseum presented new challenges, from overseeing the brutal gladiatorial fights to dealing with the ever-present threat of civil unrest among the crowds. Marcus had to be prepared for anything. The Colosseum was not just a battleground, but a place where political power was on display, and it was his job to ensure that power lands. Organizing such events required not only skill, but an intricate and highly controlled system of management. That morning, Marcus stood atop one of the higher platforms of the Colosseum, looking out over the vast structure. The first rays of the sun cast a golden glow over the stone walls of the arena, creating an awe-inspiring sight. Below him, the nose of workers preparing the arena for the day's events could be heard. Columns, battle equipment, and weapons were being double-checked for safety. It was a massive operation, and every detail mattered with a keen eye. Marcus began his rounds, starting by checking the underground cells where the gladiators prepared for battle. These underground areas were crucial to keeping the fighters and animals safe before they were brought up to the main arena. The gates, made of heavy iron, would open to release the combatants into the spotlight. Beneath the ground, gladiators prepared themselves mentally and physically, donning their heavy armor and gripping their weapons, ready to face whatever fate awaited them. Each one had their reasons for being here. Some were slaves, others were fallen soldiers, and a few were volunteers seeking the fame that could come with victory. But what united them was their thirst for glory, and for many, their only way to survive was to win. But Marcus's duties didn't stop at ensuring the gladiators' readiness. He also had to maintain order among the spectators, a task that was far from easy. People came from all over the empire to witness the bloodshed, from the wealthy nobles sitting in luxury to the common citizens and slaves who filled the distant standing areas. The Colosseum was not just a place for entertainment. It was a public spectacle that reinforced Roman power and unity, ensuring that the crowds behaved and remained safe, particularly during the most intense moments of battle, was an enormous responsibility. Another critical aspect of Marcus's job was overseeing the animals used in the arena. Lions, tigers, bears, and even elephants were brought in for the animal hunts that were such a staple of Roman entertainment. These animals were not only dangerous, but expensive to transport and house. It was up to Marcus to ensure that the beasts were properly cared for before and after their performance, and that no harm came to them or the gladiators during the battle. These animals, often from far-flung regions of the empire, were symbols of Rome's power over nature and its vast reach across the world. After ensuring that everything was in place for the day's events, Marcus made his way down to the arena floor. The crowds were beginning to gather, their voices growing louder as they eagerly anticipated the start of the games. The arena was ready, and it was time for the battles to begin. Yet, as always, the job of the arena keeper was never simple. Every fight carried the potential for unforeseen events, and today, as on every other day, Marcus would have to face the challenge of keeping order amidst the chaos, ensuring that all went according to plan. Let's continue in part 2. See the challenges Marcus faced throughout the day as he kept the Colosseum running smoothly. As the sun reached its zenith, the Colosseum was alive with the hum of anticipation. The crowds had filled the massive structure, and the air was thick with excitement. The mighty arena, which had been quiet just hours ago, was now buzzing with the energy of tens of thousands of spectators. Marcus Valerius, the vigilant keeper of the Colosseum, knew that his real work was just beginning. The gladiators were ready. The animals were in their holding pens, and the audience was waiting for the spectacle to begin. Marcus moved swiftly through the maze of corridors beneath the Colosseum, checking on the gladiators as they made their final preparations. Some were sharpening their swords, others were pacing nervously, and a few remained in deep concentration, mentally preparing themselves for the brutal contest ahead. Gladiators, whether slaves, prisoners of war, or volunteers, all understood that their survival depended on their skill and strength. The contrast between the opulence of the upper tiers and the gritty reality of the lower levels was stark. It was a reminder that, in this grand empire, the arena was a place where social divisions. He was no longer just a spectator, but a man with the responsibility of ensuring everything went according to plan. The combatants circled one another, each waiting for the right moment to strike. The audience roared with every blow, every move, every near miss. It was a dance of life and death, one that held the attention of every person in the Colosseum. But it was not just the fighters Marcus had to keep an eye on. He had to monitor the crowds as well. The Colosseum, while a place of entertainment, was also a place where tensions could rise quickly. Political factions, disgruntled citizens, and those looking to cause trouble could easily disrupt the event. Marcus kept a sharp eye on the spectators, watching for any signs of unrest. He knew that even the smallest disturbance could quickly escalate into something far worse. The gladiator combat continued, the fighters pushing themselves to their limits, their movements fueled by desperation and determination. Every strike was followed by a cheer or a gasp from the crowd. As the match reached its climax, Marcus's attention was momentarily diverted to a disturbance in the stands. A group of unruly spectators had begun shouting insults at the fighters, and a few of them were throwing objects into the arena. Marcus quickly signaled to his subordinates, and within moments the offenders were subdued and escorted out. This was a routine part of his job, but it was no less important. The order of the event had to be maintained, and any disruption was swiftly dealt with as the battle came to an end with one gladiator emerging victorious. Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The match had gone as planned, and the crowd was pleased, but the work was far from over. The next event was already being prepared, a hunt involving wild animals. The spectacle of gladiator combat was only one part of the day's events. Now it was time for something different, something even more dangerous, a wild animal hunt. The arena was being cleared, and the arena keepers were bringing in the beasts. As Marcus made his way to the animal holding pens, he prepared for the next phase of his long day. The Colosseum, with its roaring crowds and the clashing of steel, was just one chapter in the ongoing spectacle of Roman entertainment. Let's continue in part 3 to see how Marcus handles the wild animal hunt and the challenges that come with overseeing these dangerous creatures. The sun hung high in the Roman sky, casting long shadows over the Colosseum as the gladiator match came to a dramatic conclusion. The victor, a seasoned fighter, stood tall amidst the blood-soaked sand, his sword raised in triumph. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, their cheers echoing off the ancient stone walls. The fight had been fierce, but now it was time for the spectacle to shift. The next event in the grand show was one that had always captivated the Roman populace, the wild animal hunt. Marcus Valerius, ever the vigilant overseer, moved swiftly through the corridors beneath the Colosseum. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and the metallic tang of blood. The gladiators had left the arena, and now the handlers were bringing in the beasts that would fill the sand with terror and excitement. The animal hunts were an integral part of Roman entertainment, a symbol of the empire's dominance over nature and the exotic creatures that roam far-off lands. The crowds loved these hunts, not just for the danger they posed, but for the sheer spectacle of seeing mighty creatures face off against each other or against trained hunters. Marcus approached the animal holding pens, where the beasts were being prepared for the hunt. He had seen it all before: lions, tigers, bears, and even elephants, all captured from the farthest corners of the empire. Some of these creatures had been brought to Rome by traders, while others had been taken during military campaigns in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The Colosseum, with its vast arena, was the perfect place for these animals to display their power and ferocity. But it was also a place where they could be controlled where the Roman elite could assert their superiority over the wild. The sounds of growling, trumpeting, and roaring filled the air as Marcus entered the holding area. A large group of handlers was busy preparing the animals, checking their chains, and ensuring that the beasts were calm enough to be brought into the arena. The animals, some of which had been starved or kept in captivity for weeks, were restless and agitated. Their instincts to hunt and fight were still sharp, even if they had been conditioned to the confines of the arena. The handlers, however, were used to this. They knew how to keep the animals under control and make sure they were ready for their performance. Marcus paused for a moment, watching as a young lion was brought out of its cage. It was magnificent, with a golden mane and piercing eyes that glowed with an inner fire. The beast had been trained to face gladiators in combat, but there was no mistaking the raw power that lay beneath its tame exterior. It was the kind of animal that could easily turn on its trainers or any gladiator who wasn't careful. Marcus knew this well. He had seen more than one careless handler meet their end at the claws of these wild creatures. "Is everything ready?" Marcus asked one of the senior handlers, a man named Gaius, who was known for his experience with the beasts. "Yes, Marcus," Gaius replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The lions are ready, and the bulls will be brought out next. We're only waiting on the signal from the front gates." Marcus nodded and glanced toward the arena entrance, where the crowd was eagerly waiting. He could hear their excited chatter rising in volume as the event approached. It was always the same: the anticipation of the unknown, the thrill of seeing these beasts brought into the arena, and the chance to witness a fight between man and nature. The signal came. The gates of the Colosseum opened, and the first animal, a massive lion, was released into the arena. The crowd gasped as the beast emerged, its powerful body rippling with muscle. It strode out into the center of the arena, its mane fluttering in the wind, and let out a mighty roar that reverberated throughout the stadium. The spectators fell silent, mesmerized by the sheer majesty of the creature before them. But this was not just a display of power. It was also a test of the gladiators' courage and skill. A group of fighters was already standing in the arena, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. They were armed with spears and swords, and they knew that their task was not just to kill the animal, but to entertain the crowd while doing so. The rules were clear. They had to prove their bravery by facing the beast head-on, but they also had to do so in a way that made the spectacle dramatic and thrilling for the audience. The fighters knew that their actions would be scrutinized by thousands of eyes, and their success or failure would determine their future. In the arena, the first gladiator, a muscular man named Lucius, stepped forward. He had fought many times in the Colosseum, but today was different. Today, he faced a creature whose raw power could crush him in an instant. He tightened his grip on his spear, his muscles tensing as he prepared to face the lion. The beast seemed to sense his presence and turned toward him, its eyes locking on to Lucius with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. For a moment, there was only silence, a brief, pregnant pause as the gladiator and the lion sized each other up. Then, with a sudden movement, the lion lunged forward, its jaws snapping as it charged. Lucius raised his spear and thrust it toward the beast. But the lion was faster, sidestepping the blow and swiping at him with its massive paw. The force of the strike sent Lucius stumbling backward, his shield barely holding up against the attack. Marcus watched closely from his position above the arena. His job wasn't just to observe, it was to ensure that the battle remained under control. If the gladiators or animals became too dangerous, if anyone was seriously injured or killed, Marcus would need to make a swift decision. But for now, the fight was unfolding as expected. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, cheering as Lucius regained his footing and readied himself for another strike. The battle continued, a dance of life and death with Lucius and the lion circling each other. Every moment was critical. A wrong move, a slip of the foot, could mean the end for either combatant. Finally, after a tense standoff, Lucius saw an opening. With a swift and calculated strike, he drove his spear into the lion's side. The beast let out a final roar before collapsing onto the sand. The blood pouring from the wound, the crowd erupted into applause, chanting Lucius's name. Marcus felt a small sense of relief. The battle had been intense, but everything had gone according to plan. The gladiator had survived, the animal had been defeated, and the audience was satisfied. But this was just the beginning. More animals, more battles, and more drama would follow. As the Colosseum continued to shake with the applause of the spectators, Marcus moved on to the next part of his duties. The arena was far from empty, and the hunt wasn't over. Another wave of animals was waiting, and he had to ensure everything was ready for the next round. But beyond the animal hunts and gladiatorial fights, there was something else he had to manage: the welfare of the fighters, the safety of the audience, and the management of the event itself. Let's continue in part 4 to see how Marcus handles the aftermath of the animal hunts and the remaining challenges of the day. Marcus's job as the overseer of the Colosseum was far more than just watching the gladiators fight and the animals battle. It was about maintaining order, ensuring safety, and upholding the grandeur. Wounds would be too much for him to recover from. As Marcus made his way to the medical area, he noticed a few other injured fighters, their faces grim, their bodies battered and bruised. From the day's combat, some would make full recoveries, while others might not be so lucky. Gladiators, after all, were not guaranteed long lives. They were often young men, filled with dreams of glory and riches, but many of them died before they reached the age of 30. Gaius, Marcus called to one of the medical attendants, an older man with a stoic demeanor. "How are the gladiators?" Gaius looked up, his face tired but professional. "They'll survive, but it'll take time. Lucius will be fine, but he'll need to rest." "He's in good shape otherwise," Marcus nodded, grateful that Lucius would recover, though he knew that the next battle could easily be his last. For now, the medical area was the safest place for the fighters, and Marcus made sure they had everything they needed to heal. His mind was always on the bigger picture, though ensuring that the next set of games would be just as thrilling, just as grand as the current ones. After checking on the gladiators, Marcus moved to oversee the aftermath of the animal hunts. The dead lion was already being carted away, its body dragged across the sand as the handlers cleaned up. The arena, the Colosseum staff worked quickly and efficiently, scrubbing the sand where the animal had fallen. clearing away the bloodstains and preparing the area for the next event. While the workers cleaned, Marcus stood at the edge of the arena, observing the vastness of the structure. From here, he could see the upper tiers of the Colosseum, where the wealthy Roman elite sat in their lavish seats looking down on the spectacle below. The lower tiers, where the common people gathered, were bustling with chatter and excitement. The contrast between the classes was stark, but the Colosseum was a place where, for a few hours, everyone could come together in a shared experience. It didn't matter if you were a noble or a slave when the games were on. Everyone was equal in the eyes of the arena. But Marcus knew that this unity was only superficial. The games were not just about entertainment. They were a tool of political power, a way for the emperor and the ruling elite to maintain control over the masses. The games showcased the might of Rome, the strength of its military, and its ability to conquer not just other nations, but nature itself. The violence of the arena was a reflection of the violence that underpinned the empire's power. Every gladiatorial combat, every wild animal hunt, every public execution reinforced the image of Rome as an unstoppable force. As he stood there contemplating, a loud horn sounded from the front of the Colosseum, signaling the beginning of the next event. Marcus quickly turned and made his way to the entrance. The crowd was growing restless, eager for the next spectacle. The Colosseum was a living entity, constantly shifting and changing, with the spectators always hungry for more. But this time, it wasn't gladiators or animals that would take center stage. The next event was a public execution, one of the final, yet most anticipated events of the day. The execution. The crowd fell into an expectant hush as the condemned men were brought into the arena. The prisoners had been convicted of various crimes: rebellion, theft, or political dissent against the empire. To the masses, they were nothing more than criminals, their deaths necessary to maintain order in the Roman world. Marcus knew that this part of the day's events was always the most intense. It wasn't just the physical violence that people crave, but the public humiliation of those who had broken the laws of Rome. The crowd, from the high-ranking senators to the slaves in the upper tiers, watched intently as the condemned were led to the center of the arena. Marcus stood off to the side, watching as the executioners prepared. The condemned men were knelt before the emperor's box, their heads bowed in submission. They would not be allowed to fight. Their fate was sealed. In many ways, this event was the least enjoyable for Marcus, but it was just as important to the fabric of Roman society. The display of power and control was as much a part of the games as any gladiatorial match or animal hunt. The executioner raised his axe, and a swift blow fell. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Marcus's eyes never left the bodies of the fallen men. He had seen this countless times before, but each execution left a mark on him. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be in the empire, how a single misstep could cost a person everything. As the final events of the day came to an end, the Colosseum began to empty, the crowds dispersing back into the streets of Rome. The games were over for today, but Marcus's work was far from finished. There were reports to write, accounts to settle, and the arena to prepare for the next event. The Roman people would expect more, and Marcus would have to make sure everything was ready. Let's continue in part 5 to see how Marcus winds down the day handles the closing duties and reflects on the weight of his responsibilities as the keeper of the Colosseum. Part 5, Nightfall, Closing Duties and Reflection. As the Colosseum slowly emptied of spectators, the immense structure, which had roared with life and energy just moments before, now seemed eerily quiet. The evening sky darkened, casting the arena in shadow, and the once thriving crowds began to dissolve into the streets of Rome. Their laughter and chatter faded into the distance, replaced by the hum of the bustling city outside the walls. For Marcus Valerius, the day was not yet over. As the keeper of the Colosseum, his work extended long beyond the final moments of the games. While the crowds trickled out, Marcus remained behind, overseeing the final cleanup. He walked through the stands where the remnants of the day's events, discarded food wrappers, broken shields, and blood-stained sand, lay scattered across the arena floor. The workers and attendants were busy tidying up, but it was always Marcus's responsibility to ensure that everything was done according to the highest standards. The Colosseum was more than just a place of entertainment. It was a symbol of Roman power, and every detail needed to be perfect. Marcus made his way to the gladiator quarters, where the fighters, both victors and the wounded, were taken for their post-battle care. Even as the night crept in, the work continued. Gladiators who had been injured earlier and today now lay in beds, some moaning in pain, others resting quietly as they received medical attention. Lucius, the gladiator who had fought the lion, was among them, his wounds being carefully treated by the physicians. "Is he going to recover?" Marcus asked one of the attendants who was tending to Lucius. "His wounds are deep, but he will live," the attendant replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "He'll need several weeks of rest." Marcus nodded. It was good news, but Lucius's future in the arena remained uncertain. Recovery could take months, and many gladiators found themselves too injured to return to the fighting pits after a serious injury. If Lucius was fortunate, he would return to fight again. If not, his life as a gladiator would be over, and he would likely be relegated to a life of obscurity or servitude. As Marcus moved through the corridors beneath the arena, he took note of everything around him: the status of the gladiators, the cleanup process, the maintenance of the equipment, and the safety of the arena. Each area required attention, but all of it was secondary to one thing: the report that he needed to submit to the officials of Rome by morning. Every event, every battle, and every death had to be recorded accurately, not only for historical record, but for the political power of those who ran the empire. The games were not just for the entertainment of the masses. They were a statement of Rome's might, and every detail was meticulously documented. The administrative close, in the quiet of his office, a small chamber tucked away in one of the upper levels of the Colosseum, Marcus sat at a wooden desk, covered with scrolls and parchment. The day's events had been written down, but now it was time to prepare the formal report that would be submitted to the Senate and the Emperor's representatives. The report detailed the battles, the animal hunts, the public executions, and the gladiators who had participated, and it also outlined the financial aspects of the games: how much had been spent on the beasts, how many spectators had attended, and the revenue generated by ticket sales. Marcus worked quickly, writing by the light of a single oil lamp. His hand moved steadily across the paper, but his mind was elsewhere, reflecting on the day. The brutality of the gladiator fights, the wild animal hunts, and the executions was something he had witnessed countless times, yet it never grew easier. The violence was a necessary part of the empire's grandeur, and Marcus understood its importance. However, as he sat in the dimly lit room, he couldn't help but think of the men who had fought in the arena, those whose lives were forever altered by the events of the day, and those whose lives were ended altogether. His thoughts turned to Lucius again. The gladiator had shown great courage in the face of the lion, but even victory came with a heavy price. Would he ever fight again, or would his wounds end his career? There was no way to tell. Marcus finished writing the report, sealing it in a scroll, and preparing it for delivery. He had done his duty, but the weight of it all lingered. The bloodshed, the spectacle, the politics, it all left its mark on him. The Colosseum was an empire within an empire, a place where life and death were decided by the whims of the powerful, and Marcus was one of the few who truly understood the cost of it all. Final check and reflection. Before leaving for the night, Marcus took one last walk through the Colosseum, his footsteps echoing through the now empty halls. The massive stone structure seemed to have taken on a different aura in the quiet of the evening. During the day, it was alive with the energy of the crowd, the roars of spectators, and the sounds of battle. But now it stood silent, as though it too was reflecting on the day's events. The blood-stained sand in the arena was being swept away by the workers, and soon it would be ready for the next round of games. Marcus paused for a moment at the top of the arena. Looking out over the vast expanse, he could see the faint outlines of the structures around Rome, the distant glow of the city's lights, and the ever-present reminder of the empire's reach. The Colosseum was a symbol of Roman power, and Marcus was its keeper. He had dedicated his life to ensuring the arena operated smoothly, but as he stood there, he couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. The violence, the spectacle, the endless cycle of combat, it was all a reflection of a society built on dominance, control, and the survival of the fittest. And yet Marcus could not deny the allure of it. The Colosseum was a marvel of engineering, a testament to Rome's grandeur, and he was part of that legacy. The crowds had cheered, the gladiators had fought, and the games had been completed. It was what the people had come for, what they had expected, and what Rome demanded. As he turned to leave, Marcus's thoughts shifted back to the coming days. The games would continue, the battles would rage, and the blood would flow. But for now, he could rest. Tomorrow would bring another day of spectacle, another set of challenges. But for tonight, Marcus could reflect on his role in keeping the Colosseum alive, and the weight of history that came with it. As the final moments of the day fade into the night, we are reminded of the complexity of the Roman Colosseum and the lives that intersected within its walls. For Marcus Valerius, the work was never truly done. The games may have ended, but the responsibilities of overseeing the Colosseum continued. It was a life of constant vigilance, a life spent in the shadow of history, where every act, every fight, and every spectacle contributed to the legacy of Rome. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. We hope this glimpse into the life of a Colosseum keeper has given you a deeper understanding of the world behind the games and the men and women who lived within it. Remember, at 45 Minutes Sleep History, we bring history to life one story at a time. Good night and sleep well.